What's going on, guys? Motonosity here, back with another vlog. I was watching a video yesterday, one of my old videos. It was the first ride that I ever had on the R3 after doing the build series on it, after completing the bike. If you're new to the channel, or maybe you just don't remember, I did an R3 build series, converting an R3 into a Street Fighter R3 a couple years ago. I got a lot of hate at the beginning just from people wondering why on earth would I want to buy a 300? This after I had already had an R6, already had an R1, I had a 450 Supermoto, so I was like no stranger to large bikes. And granted, this was a giveaway series, so I wasn't keeping the bike as a personal bike, but I ended up falling in love with the thing. So in this video, it's the first ride that I have on the bike after finishing the whole build. And I'm just giddy as a schoolgirl. Like, I'm talking about how it feels so nice. I'm pointing out like every little thing about the bike that I love so much that I did to it. Just having fun on something that can barely top 100 miles an hour. Like, I think the top speed was like something in the neighborhood of like 105, 110. And then that had me thinking back to the video that I made after I bought the Ruckus. Of course, I did a GY6 swap on it. So it went from being a 49cc to being a 171cc. The video that I made after I first bought the bike, when it was completely stock, I did like a mods plan video, just cruising around here in downtown Austin, and I'm just freaking having a blast. And then I think back to one of the most fun days I've ever had on a bike. It was out in Hawaii. My wife and I went to Maui, stayed with Accidental Broadcast. We just had an awesome day riding around on little mini bikes, a couple Groms, a couple Z125s, just riding around the island. And it was easily top 3 days I've ever had on a bike. And then the last thing that comes to mind is the trip that I had up to New York with Walterific and Chase on Two Wheels, and we rode a bunch of different bikes. One of the best days, top 3 that I've had on a bike. And we just rode around New York State on like 4 different bikes, I think. We rode a Ducati Scrambler, a Honda Goldwing, a Can-Am Spider, and a Harley. All these completely different bikes, types of bikes that I had never ridden before, and I had so much fun. I grew to love the Honda Goldwing. I want a Goldwing so bad now. I've ridden 3 different generations of Goldwings now, and they're one of my favorite bikes. But I probably never would have ridden them before. I kind of just scoffed at Goldwings, but I had a legitimate great day riding that thing. But that brings me to kind of the point of the video. One of the biggest questions I get, being, you know, relatively large, I'm not huge, but I'm kind of big. The question I get the absolute most is, what bike should I get? And a lot of times I'm getting questions from beginners asking what they should get as their first bike, and sometimes I'm getting questions from people who have been riding. And so many people have made this type of video. What beginner bike should you get? Or what's the best beginner bike? What's the best first bike? Even myself, I've made similar videos. I've come to the point where I just think it misses the point. When you're just getting started out riding motorcycles, it's hard to really know what you want. You know, a lot of people these days, you guys are watching YouTube and you're seeing motorcycles. A lot of you might just get into motorcycles because of the people that you watch on YouTube, and you fall in love with the image of a bike and what it looks like, or maybe the type of bike that someone that you really enjoy following, that you really look up to, the type of bike they ride, and then you want that one, and you just don't know what bike fits your lifestyle, what bike you want or need in your life. And so lately, when people ask me this question, or I'm talking with friends about it, I've kind of settled on this response. Don't think about it too much. Don't get too deep into it. It doesn't really matter. Your first bike does not have to be your dream bike. Your first bike doesn't even have to be the bike that fits your lifestyle the best. Your priority when you buy your first bike should be learning to ride and figuring out what that bike is, figuring out what you actually like about riding motorcycles and what you want out of it. Maybe you're buying a bike because you want to commute on it, and after you ride for a while you realize, I don't really want to commute on a motorcycle. Or maybe you're just buying something for the weekend and you realize that you find yourself commuting on it all the time and it really doesn't fit that functionality best. You know, my first bike was a 2005 SV650S. It was a good amount of power without being too much for a beginner, and I just settled on that bike because it seemed from the research that I had done that it was a good bike for a beginner, but I really didn't have a whole lot of experience, because at that point you haven't ridden anything. Maybe the only bike that you've ridden is the bike at your MSF course. Speaking of which, if you're in the US, I'm sure there are similar things in other countries as well. In the US, we have the MSF course, and essentially it makes it so that you can go get your license pretty easily. It's about 125 bucks, I think, and it teaches you all the basics of riding. It has, you know, classroom stuff as well as on-bike work. But I strongly recommend not buying a bike until after you've done it, because it'll help you a little bit figuring out what type of bike you might want, at least to gear you in the general direction of a type of motorcycle. But again, don't get too deep in it. Don't worry about it too much, because here's the thing. If you time things right and you're patient, that's the biggest thing. I know it's hard for a lot of you guys. I know it is. But if you're patient with getting your first bike and selling your first bike, you don't have to worry about the money that you put into your first bike. If I could give you one tip with buying your first motorcycle, it's this: buy it in winter. If you buy it in winter, the market's lower, especially if you live someplace where you actually can't ride in the winter. For me, I live in Texas. I can pretty much ride year round. There may be 1, maybe 2 days out of the year that I really can't ride because of ice on the road. But in general, bikes are going to be cheaper in the winter. Now, there's a lot of tips that go along with that. 2, buy something used. Do not, under any circumstance, buy a new bike for your first bike. I don't care how much money you got burning a hole in your pocket, whether it's 1,200 bucks or 12,000 bucks. Buy a used motorcycle, because 1, there's a chance that you're gonna wreck it. Even if you don't wreck it, just your inexperience riding, you might lay the bike down in your garage, you might trip over something when you're stopped at a stoplight. The second reason for that is you just don't know. You don't know what bike you want. And when you put all that money into a first bike, when you roll that thing off the showroom floor, you're losing a ton of value on that bike. This kind of all goes into my biggest reason for buying a used motorcycle. But stick with me, because this is all crucial with getting your first motorcycle. 3, don't worry too much about what bike you're buying. Now, that doesn't mean that you should buy something that's falling apart, that's in terrible condition. You still want to do your due diligence, making sure that you're buying something that's in good condition. But don't worry too much about finding the perfect bike. It doesn't need to be a dream bike, it just needs to be a good deal. You know, when I was looking for my first bikes, and what I do when I look for all my bikes, make a spreadsheet and look at all the bikes that are for sale, figure out what goes into the pricing of that type of motorcycle, what's a good deal, what's a bad deal. In general, I think you should lean towards getting something that's stock or close to stock. You just want to make sure that you're not overspending for the bike, and the reason for that is why all of this comes together. If you get a good deal, even if you get an okay deal on a motorcycle, if you buy it in winter, you take care of it, you clean it up before you sell it, and it's well maintained, when you sell the bike in the summer, whether it be after 6 months of riding or whether it be a year and a half after riding, maybe you really like the bike and you keep it for a couple of years. Sell the bike at the start of summer when the weather starts getting real good, and you will make money on your first bike. That's why it doesn't matter which bike you're getting. And again, that's why I say do the MSF course first, because you're going to be riding some type of motorcycle at your MSF course. You don't have to provide your own, and that will give you a general idea of what kind of bike you might want. So then figure out a good starter bike in that style of motorcycle. If you're at loss for words and you have no idea, just get something like an R3. Don't get something super aggressive. I'm riding a BMW S1000 right now, but this should not be the motorcycle you're getting as the first bike. Not even this type of motorcycle. Don't get an R6. You want something that is easy to ride. And that's why I've kind of changed my mind on supermotos. I used to say, oh, get a supermoto as a first bike. They're unbreakable.
Okay, so I lost the audio from the rest of this ride, so I'll just finish it off with the voiceover. But yeah, I don't really recommend a supermoto as a first bike anymore, just because it's not the most easy bike that you can ride as a beginner. But if that's what you want, that's fine. Again, your focus when you buy that first bike is just getting a really good deal. To give you an example, again, my first bike was a 2005 SV650S that I bought at the end of 2011. So it was a 6 to 7 year old bike when I bought it. I bought the bike with 4,000 miles, kept it a year and a half, put about 7,000 miles on it. And when I sold it, I made about 10% on that bike, a 10% profit on a bike that I had put 7,000 miles on. For my second bike, that was a 2009 R6. I bought it in January of 2013. And looking at the market today, 7 years after I bought that bike, the average has maybe gone down about $500. And there are still bikes being listed that are more expensive than mine was at the time. 7 years later. A majority of the value of mainstream bikes is gonna be lost in that first 3 to 5 years. So if you're buying a bike that's 4 or 5 years old and it's not the most obscure motorcycle out there, it's relatively mainstream, you're gonna be able to get a good deal and you're gonna be able to sell it pretty easily. And y'all, I just wanna see more people riding. I think the biggest hurdle is buying that first bike. Once you've done that, you're more comfortable with bikes in general, you're more accustomed to the market of motorcycles and what's out there, and it's a lot easier to buy motorcycles in the future after you've already kind of got your life surrounded around it. Once you have that first bike, you've learned how to ride, you're comfortable on a bike in all situations, and you've gotten an idea about what motorcycle you want, then with your second bike, start looking at what you might really want out of a motorcycle. Maybe the second bike doesn't have to be your dream bike either, and it doesn't have to be a perfect bike, but you can really start looking at the types of motorcycles that you would want. And so that's why I come back to all the examples that I gave at the beginning of the video, all the different bikes that I've had experience on. They weren't necessarily the dream bikes that I was picturing at the very start of my riding career. I wasn't thinking about mini bikes. I wasn't thinking about giant cruisers like the Goldwing. But after I'd been riding for a while and I got to experience more types of motorcycles, you learn that it's not necessarily having the dream bike that makes riding fun. You know, it's the places that you ride, it's the people that you ride with. If you just get on 2 wheels and you find those things, you're gonna have a great time. That and just learning is what I think makes motorcycling the most fun. So don't get too hard on yourself or get too stressed about finding the perfect bike for your first bike or even your next bike. Maybe you're already riding, you're still not really sure what bike you wanna get. Don't worry about it too much. Just keep riding, keep trying out new bikes. There's always gonna be more out there. So that's the last takeaway. I'm gonna leave you guys with some cinematics of the S1000. If you enjoyed the video or if it helped you out, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe so you can join me on my journey, follow along with all the builds that I do on the channel. You guys have been awesome. I've been Motonosity. Remember, life's better with horsepower. Keep life lived, and I will see you guys in the next one.